Much attention is on the president's press conference set for tomorrow over key state affairs and conflicting issues, ranging from medical reform and controversy over the First Lady to a special investigation into the death of the Marine. Ceasefire talks have resumed involving Israel and Hamas, but the two sides reportedly haven't been able to narrow their differences. This comes amid fears mounting for people in Rafah. South Korea's car exports hit a fresh high in April, thanks to greater demand for green cars and SUVs, especially in the North American market. It's May 8, 2024. This is Newscenter. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. President Yoon is set to hold a press conference tomorrow as he marks the 2-year anniversary of his inauguration this Friday. This couldn't have come at a more sensitive time when there's a series of conflicting issues, while key reform tasks lie ahead as the president prepares for his next 3 years. Our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon stirs us off.
As President Yoon prepares for his first live press conference in 21 months on Thursday, there are two questions he's most anticipated to face. One about the death of a young Marine and one about First Lady Kim Jong-un. The Democratic Party of Korea pushed through a special probe bill to investigate government interference in the probe of a Marine's death during last year's flood rescue operations. The top office suggested vetoing the bill, especially with the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials already on the case. As for the First Lady, the prosecution recently opened an investigation after she accepted a luxury bag in 2022 as a gift. President Yoon has recently vowed to address these issues himself and not his aides.
사법 리스크가 있다면은 제가 해야 될 문제이지, 제 문제를 또 저에 대해서 뭐 제기된 게 있다면 제가 설명하고 풀어야지 민정수석이 할 일은 저는 아니라고 생각합니다.
While these two issues may take all the headlines, with an hour set for the Q&A session, there will be many more.
Before the press conference, the president will first explain the government's policy direction and progress over the past 2 years through a video message from the office, and will also discuss the plans for national governance over the next 3 years.
In fact, the message Yoon will have on doctors as the collective action prolongs will be a key issue as well. In addition, he's likely to address 3 of his other reformation plans: the pension system, labor, and education, along with diplomatic issues and inflation. President Yoon hasn't had any official engagements in the 3 days leading up to the press conference on Thursday, seemingly in full prep mode. An official said the president asked his aides to prepare to focus on the questions that the public would really be curious about. The press conference comes following the ruling PPP's crushing defeat in the general election in April, and as President Yoon vowed to enhance communication with the public. He's met reporters in person and briefly took questions on multiple occasions since then as well. In the meantime, the DP called for the president to use this opportunity to approve the 250,000 won, or around $180 cash handout that it's pushing for, and accept the Marine probe.
I have high expectations. I hope that effective measures for national governance reform will be put in place.
The ruling People Power Party's interim leader Hwang Woo-yeol said in an interview with a local radio station that this will be an opportunity for President Yoon to get closer to the public, and Yoon's honest answers would dispel any of the rumors that surround him. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Shifting gears, Israel is taking part in further talks over in Egypt regarding a possible truce with Hamas after rejecting an earlier proposal that the latter had accepted. Our Kim Bo-kyung with the details.
Calling it far from meeting its demands, Israel has not accepted a ceasefire deal proposed by Egypt and Qatar, which Hamas has agreed to. In a statement on Tuesday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the latest truce proposal from Hamas was designed to torpedo the entry of Israeli forces into Rafah, which did not happen. While saying it is necessary to put military pressure on Hamas for the return of its own hostages, he firmly stated that Israel would not accept a proposal that endangers its own people's security.
Israel cannot accept a proposal that endangers the security of our citizens and the future of our country. Therefore, I've instructed the labour ranks that went to Cairo continue to stand firm on the conditions necessary for the release of our hostages, continue to stand firm on the essential requirements for guaranteeing Israel's security.
Netanyahu's words come after Hamas declared on Monday evening that it has agreed to a ceasefire deal. Meanwhile, Israel have pushed on with their military operations in Rafah, seizing control of the Gaza side of the Rafah border crossing on Tuesday morning. To this, a senior Hamas official warned that if Israel's military operations continue in Rafah, there will be no ceasefire deal.
If the aggression continues, there will be no ceasefire because Israelis are the ones attacking and shooting. This agreement, which the movement agreed to, represents the minimum that responds to the demands of our people and our resistance.
Amid the ongoing fighting between Israel and Hamas, the White House has confirmed that discussions on negotiations have resumed in Cairo, Egypt, and that CIA Director Bill Burns is there. While saying that they should be able to close the remaining gaps, the national security spokesman added that the U.S. will do everything to support the process. In a separate briefing, the White House spokesperson made it clear that Washington does not want to see a major operation taking place in Rafah, and that it wants to see a comprehensive plan from Israel to protect civilians who have sought refuge there. Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
In Russia, Vladimir Putin has begun his fifth term in office with claims of a will to work with the West, provided it's on equal footing. Lee Seung-jae covers his remarks.
Tuesday marked the beginning of another 6 years in office for Russian President Vladimir Putin, with this inauguration ceremony taking place in Moscow. His fifth term in office comes amid fierce criticism from the West amid the prolonged war in Ukraine. During his inauguration speech, Putin expressed willingness to hold talks with the West, but only on equal terms.
Dialogue, including on issues of security and strategic stability, is possible, but not from a position of force. Without any arrogance, snobbishness, feeling of one's own exclusiveness, but only as equals, respecting each other's interests.
Putin also stressed that the country's state, public, and political system must remain strong and resistant to any challenges and threats in order to maintain the stable development, unity, and independence of Russia. The Russian leader also vowed to grow Russia into the world's fourth largest economy by 2030. The ambitious goal comes as Putin signed a decree that sets national development goals for 2030 and beyond on the day of his inauguration. In the decree, Putin called for Russia's GDP growth to be above the global average, while increasing research and development costs to 2% of GDP by 2030, raising the ranking of R&D spending compared to economic size to within the world's top 10. Meanwhile, South Korea's ambassador to Russia, Lee Do-hoon, attended the inauguration. A South Korean government official who spoke on the condition of anonymity said that Lee's participation was decided after careful consideration of various pending bilateral issues and the need to manage bilateral relations with Moscow. His visit also came despite the boycott of Western countries amid the protracted war in Ukraine. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And North Korea's Kim Jong-un has sent a congratulatory letter to his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. According to the regime's state media on this Wednesday, the letter was delivered through the Russian embassy in Pyongyang. A similar letter was sent back in March by Kim following news of Putin's re-election, in which the former is said to have highlighted the importance of closer cooperation. The two leaders met for a rare summit last September in Russia. North Korea's propaganda chief Kim Ki-nam has died. The North state-run media said he passed away on Tuesday due to old age and multiple organ dysfunction. He was 94 years old. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un paid tribute to the deceased early Wednesday morning. The North media also said the regime's leader will lead the state funeral committee for Kim Ki-nam, who will be buried on Thursday. Kim spent decades heading propaganda events idolizing the leadership inheritance system within the ruling Kim family. He visited Seoul in 2009 to attend the state funeral of former South Korean President Kim Dae-jung. Chinese President Xi Jinping is on a three-country tour of Europe, his first state visit to the continent in 5 years. While there, his message looks to be directed towards the U.S. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Yoon-ji explains more.
France was Xi Jinping's first stop on his first trip to Europe in 5 years. As the two countries seek to mend ties after relations strained over trade disputes and Beijing's support for Russia, the two leaders highlighted the importance of a stable relationship.
This year marks the 60th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and France. 60 years is a jiazi in the traditional Chinese calendar, which means inheriting the past and opening up the future.
The France-China relationship is steeped in history and features mutual respect and mutual trust. I believe it can play a useful role beyond bilateral relations and, to a large extent, promote EU-China relations and world stability.
Experts say Xi's tour appears to be aimed at weakening coordination between the U.S. and Europe amid the growing rivalry between Washington and Beijing. In fact, China's Global Times, an English-language newspaper under the Chinese Communist Party's flagship newspaper, The People's Daily, said in an editorial that the two countries agreeing to enhance agricultural cooperation during Xi's visit to France may offer valuable lessons for the U.S. It warned that the future of agricultural trade between Washington and Beijing depends on the willingness of the U.S. to engage in constructive dialogue. After wrapping up his trip in France, Xi headed to more Beijing-friendly countries, Serbia and Hungary, widely seen as an attempt to exploit differences within European nations towards Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Xi arrived in Serbia on Tuesday, marking the 25th anniversary of the bombing of the Chinese embassy in Serbia, when a U.S. strike accidentally hit the compound during NATO's air campaign against Serbian forces occupying Kosovo. Upon Xi's visit, Serbian communists hung banners to welcome him that read, "Kosovo is Serbia, Taiwan is China," supporting Beijing's One China policy. Xi's last stop will be Hungary, the first EU member to join China's Belt and Road Development Program, before he wraps up his 6-day tour on May 10th. Bae Yoon-ji, Arirang News.
Overseas shipments of Korean cars hit a fresh high in April amid greater demand for green cars and SUVs in the North American market. Lee Soo-jun takes a closer look.
South Korea's auto exports reached a new monthly high in April. Data released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Wednesday showed that the value of car exports stood at $6.8 billion, topping the previous record set in November last year. This is up 10.3% compared to April the previous year. And the cumulative value of exports for the January to April period rose 4.7% on year to some $24 billion, also a record high for that period. The ministry mostly attributed the rise in car exports to the high demand for eco-friendly cars and SUVs, especially in North America. By region, the value of outbound shipments to North America was the highest, rising more than 36% compared to the previous year. The export value of eco-friendly vehicles surged more than 11% on year to $2.29 billion, smashing the previous record set in March last year. This was led by a surge in the value of outbound shipments of hybrid car exports in April, which jumped a whopping 55% compared to the previous year. Domestic production levels were also up 3.5% on year, with over 390,000 units manufactured in April, the most produced in a single month since March last year, partly due to there being one more working day compared to April last year. And while overall domestic sales dropped 5.5% compared to the previous year, the high demand for hybrid vehicles was also seen domestically as well, as sales surged 35% on year. The Trade Ministry says that its auto export target for this year is $75 billion. As part of its plans to reach this goal, it will allocate some $320 million this year and $1.4 billion over the next 5 years into automotive technology development in partnership with the private sector. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea is looking to integrate artificial intelligence into various industries to further boost manufacturing and production. On Tuesday, the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy unveiled a plan to invest more than 100 billion Korean won this year, or over $73 million to establish autonomous manufacturing plants using AI by 2030. It hopes that this will boost production by 20% of current levels, as robots presently used in production lines are limited to undertaking simple repetitive tasks. The automobiles, electronics, machinery and textile sectors are likely to benefit from this project as they integrate more advanced forms of AI into manufacturing. South Korea has been working with Indonesia to jointly develop the KF-21 fighter jet by 2026. But with Indonesia not being able to make financial contributions on time, South Korea hinted at accepting Indonesia's recent offer to significantly reduce its share of the payment. Our defense correspondent Kim Jong-un explains.
South Korea seems likely to accept Indonesia's recent proposal to cut back its financial contributions to the joint KF-21 fighter jet development project. The two countries had agreed to jointly develop the KF-21 from 2015 to 2026, with the South Korean government covering 60%, the manufacturer Korea Aerospace Industries contributing 20%, and Indonesia contributing another 20%. The expected total amount in investment was approximately 8.1 trillion won. However, Indonesia has offered to cut its payment to about a third of the original amount. This means instead of 1.6 trillion won or $1.2 billion due by 2026, the Indonesian government would only pay about 600 billion won.
We are reviewing measures in line with our national interests, considering the timely development of the KF-21 fighter jet, the impact on defense resources, and defense industry exports.
The Defense Acquisition Program Administration explained that the offer would be accepted under the condition of providing Jakarta with fewer technology transfers. If the proposal is approved, South Korea will need to secure an additional 1 trillion won or $732 million. However, the agency said the amount has been reduced by half through cost reductions that were made during the development process. The decision is set to be finalized in late May to prevent any delays in the jet's development project. Indonesia's commitment to the project has long been questioned as it missed payment deadlines, contributing just around 300 billion won so far. The proposal comes amid an ongoing probe into alleged attempts by Indonesian engineers to steal the jet's technology from Korea Aerospace Industries. Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
As a walkout among trainee doctors extends beyond 3 months, concern is growing about next year's supply of personnel to hospitals. In response, the government has proposed to allow limited permission for foreign licensed doctors to practice in Korea. Choi Soo-young has this report.
The medical crisis is growing as the collective walkout by trainee doctors and leaves of absence taken by medical students has lasted for almost 3 months. The medical authorities are concerned that there will be a shortage of new doctors next year, as there won't be enough to meet the current annual quota of 3,058 doctors per year graduating from medical schools. Also, junior trainee doctors won't be able to take specialist exams the following year if they are absent for more than 3 months. The authorities said around May 20th as the deadline for these doctors to return to their hospitals. Within the emergency response system, doctors with foreign licenses will be able to provide medical services here with the approval from the Health Ministry. But this will be limited to when the healthcare alert level reaches serious as it is now due to the walkout. The Health Ministry gave official notice of a revision to the medical law on Wednesday, stating this was to address the shortage of doctors that is creating a healthcare gap. It added that the move was to protect the health and lives of people as the dispute over increasing the medical school enrollment quota continues to escalate. The ministry will accept opinions on the revision up until May 20th, while an exact implementation date has yet to be determined. Meanwhile, the academic board at Busan National University, 320 kilometers south of Seoul in Busan, decided not to revise its internal regulations on increasing its medical school quota. The board said that, as there was no social consensus regarding the increase, it would keep its number of new students at the current level. The Education Ministry expressed regret over this, as the majority of university medical schools had already completed changes to their regulations.
While other universities have either completed or are smoothly progressing with a revision of their regulations, the ministry regrets the situation at Busan National University. The Education Ministry urges the university to complete the regulatory revision process, following its demand for an increase in medical school enrollment.
The ministry warned that if the university fails to revise its regulations, it could face a suspension from medical school admissions in 2025. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
It's been 2 years since Cheongwade, the former presidential office, also referred to as the Blue House, was transformed into a cultural landmark open to the public. Now, to celebrate this occasion, the Culture Ministry and the Cheongwade Foundation are hosting a concert called Blue House that blends diverse genres such as traditional Korean music as well as jazz and video art. It'll take place at the main building every Wednesday at 8 p.m. starting tonight until July 10th. In Seoul today, the blue and clear skies returned for the first time in 4 days. The sun shined brightly throughout the day, but it might be a little chilly after the sun goes down. If you're going out late with your family for Parents' Day today, you might want to wear a jacket. Tomorrow, high waves will rise on the east coast, the south coast areas of Gyeongsang-namdo province, and the coastal areas of Jeju Island, pushing strongly beyond coastal roads and breakwaters. Please refrain from approaching waterfronts. Tomorrow there will be clear skies across the country. Until the morning, it will be a little chilly, similar to today. Seoul will start off at 11 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon and Daejeon 9 degrees. Daily highs will move up to over 20 everywhere, making huge temperature swings. On Saturday, it is expected to start raining all over the country and continue until Sunday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니?
So, you want a special experience? What? Travel? Meet K-pop stars? Wow! Okay, tell me, who do you like? Of course I know them. Here's a tip. You can travel and meet K-pop stars. What? You don't trust me? Who do you take me for? Okay, come close. Closer. Simply K-pop contour. No need to thank me. Oh, you're watching Simply K-pop Contour. You're watching Arirang.
Hello and welcome to Within the Frame. Coming to you live from Seoul, I'm Han Daeun. North Korea's sanctions violations are becoming bolder as it cements closer ties with its old friend Russia, which recently voted to disband a UN expert panel tasked with monitoring Pyongyang's illegal activities. Petroleum and foreign missile components are reportedly continuing to flow into the rogue state, heightening security risks on the Korean peninsula and beyond. Meanwhile, hopes are brewing that South Korea and China will mend soured ties as the two countries speed up steps to resume high-level dialogue that has been stalled for years. For an in-depth analysis on the latest security issues surrounding the two Koreas, we have our regular commentator, Dr. Kim Jong-un, joining us in the studio. It's always a pleasure to have you with us.
Nice to be here.
And to my left, we have Shreyas Reddy, correspondent at NK News Seoul. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's kick things off with you, Dr. Gov't. A sanctioned North Korean oil tanker has been spotted in waters off of China, which is believed to have stopped by Russia. In this, while Australia accused a Chinese fighter jet of dropping flares dangerously close to an Australian helicopter on a UN mission to watch over North Korea's illegal maritime activities. What do you make of all these developments?
Well, now that China and Russia have essentially dismantled the UN panel of experts that was tasked with surveilling and making sure that the sanctions that the United Nations Security Council, of which China and Russia are member of, had passed in the last 10 years to be implemented fully. I think North Koreans, along with the Chinese and Russian collaborators, they no longer have to watch out for the international community's watchful gaze. So therefore, they are essentially normalizing this kind of sanctions evasion activities. And so, for instance, the Ansan 1, this is the oil tanker that was sanctioned by the United Nations back in 2018, in fact, switched on its a positioning device called AIS near the Chinese territorial waters as well as in Russia. It's a signal to the wider community that, or international community, that North Korea was no longer caring about what the international community thinks, because this tanker has been sanctioned. It's in the list of a sanctioned vessel for a very long time. So any member state, including China and Russia, have to do their due diligence in making sure that this North Korean flag tanker doesn't violate the UN sanctions, in this case, buying or loading or unloading petroleum products. But clearly, that's not happening. And then the North Koreans then realized that they no longer have to hide the tracks anymore. So, in fact, what happened, the threatening behavior by the Chinese Air Force jet fighter against the Australian helicopter that wasn't part of this operation to make sure that the United Nations Security Council resolution was implemented in East China Sea. And apparently, this Chinese jet fighter launched flare, not actual missiles, a flare to threaten this Australian military helicopter to fly away from, and then also dissuade this Australian chopper from carrying out its mission, shows that the Chinese are essentially engaged in very active measures to protect not the United Nations activities, but in fact protect North Korea's illicit behavior. So if North Korea enjoys this kind of protection from China, then I think, in fact, it actually really spells the end of the United Nations sanctions regime against North Korea.
Well, the fact that North Korea's oil tanker that has been sanctioned for such a long time is moving around freely in closely watched areas, and also the fact that, as you mentioned, North Korea is normalizing sanctions violations, is, I think, that carry serious implications. Now, Shreyas, some experts say that the winner of Russia-Ukraine war is North Korea. According to the BBC, experts in Europe, they retrieved what's believed to be North Korean missiles from Ukraine, and they were stunned at how North Korea was able to dodge all sanctions and assemble the foreign components at a remarkable speed. What are your thoughts on North Korea becoming a major missile supplier for more countries?
Well, it is definitely a big concern, and I think obviously we were talking about sanctions. Yes, sanctions prohibit North Korea from exporting missiles and other weapons, but let's not forget, for a long time, North Korea has been exporting weapons to lots of countries, has been doing it for decades. And so in that sense, it's perhaps not a new pattern for them, even if in recent years, those sanctions have made it difficult. And at the moment, we see in terms of their cooperation with Russia, we've got two countries that are more than willing to flout international sanctions as they strengthen cooperation. And for Russia, in Russia, they have a very willing buyer for the war in Ukraine. But even beyond Russia, I think it's one of those things where seeing these weapons in Ukraine, there are much bigger implications. When it comes for North Korea, they're not just getting money out of selling this to Russia, they're also effectively seeing their newest missiles battle-tested in Ukraine. These are missiles that essentially were mostly developed after sanctions, and so they have all we've really seen them in the past has been their tests in and around the Korean Peninsula. But now we're seeing them launched, and the Ukrainian forces have constantly denigrated these, say they mostly fail. But at the end of the day, for Russia, they're cheap missiles that hit they can still cause damage with it. For North Korea, they're still able to produce these missiles cheaply and in large quantities. And as far as they're concerned, they're getting valuable data out of it, as well as showcasing other potential buyers in an increasingly politicized world, polarized world, other people who may want to align themselves along the front with Russia, with North Korea, what their missiles can do, what damage they can do. And frankly, we've seen that sanctions could perhaps slow down North Korea's development, could hamper them a little bit, but it won't stop them. They've, as seen with these missiles, when the leadership wants to prioritize a particular goal, in this case, arms development and arms sales, they will do it. They will reallocate the resources. They will find a way.
I think you've pointed out a very good point there, that North Korea will never, ever give up its nuclear and missile programs, no matter what. And the missiles, if they're good enough for Russia, they're also good enough for other countries, right? Yeah. So I think Russia is setting a very dangerous precedent. And also, as you mentioned, the fact that North Korea is able to test their missiles in actual battlefield is all the more concerning. Another concerning news, North Korea conducted an unannounced liquid propellant rocket engine test in its Sohae satellite launch site. What are you reading into this?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, North Korea didn't announce this, so they obviously haven't given us details of what was there. But thanks to satellite imagery, we've been able to see evidence of activity there from the vertical engine test stand at Sohae. In terms of there's been areas under the stand have shown some signs of burn-off, effectively, which happens under intense heat, maybe chemical elements involved. And the significance of the vertical engine test stand is that it is used essentially for liquid fuel projectiles, as you mentioned, which could be for things like the space program. And Sohae is very much at the heart of North Korea's space launches, as opposed to the horizontal engine test stand, which they built last year, which is used more for solid fuel engines. Now, North Korea obviously hasn't said anything, and we haven't seen any clear-cut signs that, yes, a space launch is going ahead. We just know at some point North Korea intends to push ahead with its space launch plans. They've been saying it for a while. But seeing the vertical engine test stand being used to conduct testing activity ahead of, well, in the midst of all these rumors at North Korea's main spaceport does remind us that another satellite launch, as well as potentially other launches, could be around the horizon. North Korea has been increasingly investing in Sohae, diversifying the range of facilities like that horizontal engine test stand, other launch pads. And so we could see a satellite launch on the horizon soon, but we could also see other technologies that could use these kinds of projectiles.
And amid concerns, rising concerns over North Korea's missile and rocket launches, Dr. Go, South Korea and the U.S. have launched a joint task force to more actively prevent North Korea's financing of its nuclear and missiles, and this with a particular focus on countering the North's ability to procure petroleum. What are some possible ways to tighten the screw on that front? And do you expect a fresh round of sanctions sanctions from Seoul and Washington on North Korea as well as Russia.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so there's not much of a new innovation to take place in this area. I mean, the international community, through the United Nations, has been doing this for a very long time. We have to remember that the first sanctions on North Korea regarding the limiting North Korea's procurement of petroleum products dates back to 2017. It's been 7 years. So a lot of mechanisms are currently in place. So for instance, the incident involving the Australian helicopter and the Chinese jet fighter is in fact a part of the operation that the Australian Navy carries out regularly to enforce sanctions in East China Sea. So, but then if you want to expand that further, there are two different ways the South Korea and the United States can collaborate together to tighten the noose, so to speak, around the North Korea's illicit activities. One is clearly going after the physical manifestation of these procurement activities, essentially the movement of the oil tankers. So it's being done already. There are satellites, surveillance planes, ships, tracking the movement of these tankers. After all, we're only talking about the East China Sea. North Korean oil tankers are very small. They don't go that far. But then I think a much more tantalizing prospect, given the involvement of the Treasury Department as well as the U.S. government at large, is targeting of the financial system. So at the end of the day, when North Korea buys petroleum products, they have to pay for it. So there's a movement of money taking place, and he has to rely on the financial system, whether that's China or someone else, but then likely it's going to involve US dollars, which makes this kind of activities under the purview of the US Treasury Department. And they have monitoring systems, there are banks, financial institutions around the world, they are required to comply with the regulation that with money laundering and illicit behaviors. So they report all this information back to the US government. So there's a very I mean, it's not easy still, but then there's straightforward ways for the U.S. government to monitor this kind of activities. So at the end of the day, I think that's what the South Korean government and the U.S. government are going to work together. So the role here for the South Korean government, given that the South Korean government doesn't have this global reach, will be the political side of it. So South Korea will be very active in issuing, as you said, unilateral sanctions now. So this is important because the players that are involved in the North Korea's illicit activities are likely to be either Chinese or Russian, are also likely to be involved in trade with not with North Korea but with South Korea as well. So in that sense, South Korean government will have a lot of leverages to be used to pressure these Chinese and Russian actors that are abetting North Korea's illicit behavior. So I think if South Korea, which is a major economic powerhouse in this part of the world, involves itself actively in sanctioning entities elsewhere that are helping North Korea to evade sanctions, I think that it's going to have a very significant impact, not just on Chinese and Russian actors, but also on North Korea proper.
So South Korea has a lot more leverage to place greater pressure on involved parties. Now, Shreyas, South Korea has recently heightened its anti-terrorism alert in its diplomatic missions in 5 countries, and this after gathering intelligence that North Korea may carry out a terrorist attack against South Korean diplomats. What's behind this? How do you see this?
Well, in this case, perhaps it's rather than more concrete information about terrorism, in some ways it's perhaps a little more reflective of the current inter-Korean tensions and the current mood between the two Koreas, particularly since North Korea declared unification impossible, revamped its inter-Korean policies, and also last year suspended the comprehensive military agreement between the two countries. I think we've seen tensions on the rise for a while, and amid that backdrop, there's this concern. What if North Korea carries out a terrorist attack? There have certainly been times in the past where North Korea has attacked targets, South Korean as well as others, Kim Jong-un, famously Kim Jong-un's brother, on other countries' territory, and of course, former President Chun Doo-hwan in Myanmar. So it's one of those things where you'd say there is precedent. South Korea is perhaps playing, says, better safe than sorry. But at the same time, it should perhaps be noted that this assessment was based on raising of threat levels based on the intelligence assessment that North Korea, amid an increasing number of elite-level defections, could perhaps look to deflect the blame, say South Korea is responsible for this, and so we should retaliate. And that's something that perhaps we haven't seen the actual evidence for this. Obviously, that's up to the intelligence authorities. So it may be concrete, it may not be, but at first glance, it does seem perhaps a little speculative and may not necessarily suit North Korea's immediate strategic needs. Also, I think from North Korea's perspective, or rather from the countries these are based in, while they have close relations with North Korea, for all of them, or at least most of them, they would also not have any interest in seeing a terrorist attack carried out on their soil by a third country. And they also have relations with South Korea. So for them, this would be a problem. They would certainly not want to avoid such a situation. So perhaps it's unlikely now, but I think from South Korea's perspective, like I said, it's playing it safe.
And the key points that you listed are being echoed by many experts here in South Korea as well. And this marks the first time first North Korea terror alert on overseas missions in 14 years since the torpedo attack on the warship Cheonan. So, and not only diplomats, but Korean residents living in those countries are also advised to exercise caution for the time being. And staying with you, North Korea's external economic relations minister has expressed intent for his to boost cooperation with an Iranian automaker, Saipa, during his rare trip to Tehran. What are the implications of this and also of North Korean delegation's recent visit to Iran?
Yeah, I think as with a lot of, with the previous question, a lot of this could be down to what is the reality of it versus what is the perception of it. And certainly in this case, it could potentially have serious implications. North Korea growing closer to Iran, they already have close relations, but for the relations, there's talk of military cooperation, even though Iran has denied it. Certainly, that's always a concern. Now, in the case of this delegation, the focus was on the economy, but at the same time, you never know, as the relations strengthen, what they could lead to. In terms of the actual automotive cooperation here, now there are questions about that in terms of, under UN sanctions, technological cooperation is with North Korea is prohibited, at least, especially in cases where, for example, North Korea could learn advanced manufacturing processes, maybe have technology transfer. Also, where the cars going after this, are they likely to go to North Korea? Those are also, North Korea is not, other countries aren't allowed to sell or transfer vehicles to North Korea. So the question is, why would this happen? Why isn't Iran going to do it? Sure, both countries could perhaps stand to gain from sanctions, but from evading sanctions. But it seems there are big questions about how this would work. So I think at this point, we could also have to consider that this information essentially came from the minister visiting a trade expo in Iran, visiting the stall of this car maker, and then they said this on their social media account. It might just be blatant self-promotion. Certainly, that's what one would hope. But obviously, bigger picture, still need to keep an eye on North Korea-Iran cooperation. They have a lot of close interests. They have mutual allies. So you never know what will happen next.
Meanwhile, Dr. Go, Seoul and South Korea and China are reportedly in final stage of their talks on Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol's visit to Beijing. What will be the main focus of his visit, and do you expect the two countries to improve soured relations?
Well, this is clearly a very positive sign, positive step. But then what's remarkable about it is that this is taking place without South Korea making or conceding to China with a policy change. The reason why the two countries didn't get along in the last 3 years was because South Korea, with the inauguration of the President Yoon Suk-yeol's administration, had made it very clear that South Korea was strongly allied with the United States, and also it was no longer willing to play the fence sitter between China and the United States, with these two major powers that are engaged in essentially a global competition. And the Chinese thought that by keeping its distance from South Korea would eventually turn around and try to approach Beijing in a more positive attitude from their point of view. But now the Chinese government is actually resuming high-level contacts without South Korean government having changed such a policy. So in that sense, it's a major achievement on the part of the President Yoon Suk-yeol. policy of strategic clarity. And I think this is going to pave the way for the realization of the three-way summit, the East Asian Summit, with the South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, the Japanese Prime Minister Kishida, as well as the Chinese Premier Li Chang. They're going to come together and have a meeting, and this is going to signal to the wider international community that there's stability among the three East Asian countries, and the Chinese have a lot of incentives to do so because they need to stabilize their foreign relations right now because of they are facing domestic troubles, especially the economic challenges that they're facing at home. So they need to make sure, they have to make sure that they have good relations with both Korea and Japan. So in that sense, I think this has been a very positive outcome. South Korea didn't have to change the external policies to be in sync with the Chinese interest, and China has accepted South Korea as an important ally of the United States without any expectation that South Korea will distance itself from Washington.
And the final question is also for you. Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Europe for his three-nation tour. This marks the first time he's visiting the continent in 5 years. What are the key points that South Korea should keep close tabs on? So clearly, the Chinese President Xi is in Europe, in France, having a three-way meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron, as well as the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. And this three-way meeting is taking place because the European interests are aligned with the Chinese interests in the sense that they want to preserve the existing free trade order. They see they see over the horizon threat to this trade order in the form of the potential return of the former U.S. President Donald Trump to the White House. So they want to ensure that this free trade order remains, even if there are political changes taking place in Washington. But then there are sticking points out there. China is not exactly a fair competitor when it comes to free trade. So, for instance, the major issue here is the EV trade. I mean, the batteries. The batteries that go into electric vehicles. And the Chinese are dumping these batteries at the below market price in the world market, and the global automakers are suffering from it. So the French have asked the Chinese to address this issue, which the Chinese government didn't recognize anyway. So that's going to be a contentious point going forward. But then I think there are common interests here, mainly about the stability in the international community. We're talking about the war in Ukraine. And I think the Europeans are going to ask the Chinese to have a much more of an active role in brokering peace between Ukraine and Russia. And in that sense, China has an interest in both sides in this case. So it could be that with Chinese active involvement, we'll have maybe a peace on our hands soon. So I think these are the two issues that South Korea should be watching out for. Potential changes in the trade order, or maybe not the change, but the preservation of the existing trade order, as well as the end game happening in the war in Ukraine. All right, we'll leave it there tonight. Thank you, Dr. Go, as always, and Shreyas for your valuable insights. Great analysis. Thanks to both of you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this show. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back with more same time tomorrow.